30 service. Hey, my name is Joel, like they just mentioned, and I'm the campus pastor of a church called Oakbrook Church in Kokomo, and this is such a treat for me to be with you guys this morning because I was actually helping out Hope City in the launch phase a little bit when there were like 6 of you. And so this is such a beautiful thing to be here with you this morning, to see the way that God has started this movement in Indianapolis through this church and through so many of you. And it is just a privilege to be here with you. Justin told me not to burn the place down, so I've got that going for me. But also I have more hair than he has. And so we'll see how this goes. My boss, the lead pastor at our church, also is bald, so I get to cover that a lot. But I'm excited to be here with you guys this morning and talking about this idea of the advantage of disadvantage. I was thinking a couple of months back that Christians, we believe some crazy things. We just need to call it what it is. We believe some crazy things that are not normal at all. And maybe you're here this morning and wouldn't consider yourself a Christian or a Christ follower. You're kind of skeptic to the whole thing. But Christians do believe some wacky things. We believe things like forgiveness is better than holding bitterness, and reconciliation and going towards someone who's hurt you is the better way to live. We believe that generosity is the best way to live, and not to have our hands so clinched with our time, our talents, and our resources, but to be open-handed towards the world is a better way to live. And we believe those kind of things that are kind of crazy and countercultural. We also believe in these things called miracles. Like that there's a natural order of the world, but divine, God can break that natural order and things can change, which is just crazy, which is not normal at all. And then there's one miracle that the entire Christian story and the Christian message is really centered on, and that's this thing called a resurrection, and specifically the resurrection of Jesus, right? That he was literally dead, but God raised him from the dead, and he's alive, and that gives us all the hope that we sang about this morning, and that gives us a reason to continue on in life, which is crazy to admit. But one thing that I think is one of the hardest, most challenging things for us to really believe and to live out in our lives is found in the book of James. James was Jesus' brother, and this is what James says in chapter 1, verse 2. We'll put it up on the screens. He said, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." And this is crazy stuff. Can I say that sometimes the Bible annoys me, and this is an annoying verse in the Bible? I'm like, are you serious? I mean, James would have been that friend, the annoying friend that we all have, that we could break our arm and it's dangling off. And they'd be like, it's good, it's a good story, man. It's going to be a great story. I mean, James is always looking at the glass half full. And James is saying, hey, when you have trials or when you have challenges in your life, consider it an opportunity to be happy and to have joy in your life, which is so crazy and so hard for us to wrap our minds around. I mean, one way for us to describe these kind of challenges or trials in our lives, I call them giants. And so for the sake of our message this morning, this is how we're going to define giants. There we go. Giants are powerful opponents in our lives. They're those challenges, those trials, those situations that we feel ill-equipped to actually do anything about. And we feel like they're always there and we're running on the wheel we can't quite break through, or it's a wall that we can't quite figure out how to scale on our own. We've all got situations like that. Maybe for you it's a season of your life and you're just waiting for something to change. My wife and I, we've been married now for a little over 8 years, and we bought our first home 5 years ago, and it was a 100-year-old home in sort of a historic downtown part of Kokomo where I live, and it was so bad that we couldn't live there for the first 3 months because we were basically getting it flipped for ourselves. It was so bad that we got it really cheap, so that was a great thing too. But for 3 months, we lived with my parents in the basement of the house that I grew up in. Now, I hadn't lived at home for about 8 years, and I moved right back in with my parents, and that was a season, and that was a giant in my life that I was waiting for it to be over with for sure. I mean, my parents are great, but there were all these new challenges that happened when I moved back in at the age of 27, and I'm living now with my wife in the basement that I grew up with. I love my mom so much, but I was not accustomed to the mom questions that I was going to get. You guys know the mom questions? You come home from your day, and my mom is so sweet. She just wants to know everything about it. Who'd you talk to today? Oh, what did you do today? Oh, was that fun? Oh, what are you doing later? I get all these questions, and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm really getting interrogated like when I was 16 years old. Or I would get the great mom guilt. And moms, you guys are incredible at the mom guilt. I'd get, oh, you're eating. Yes, you're eating. My mom would say, oh, you're eating with your friends tonight? You guys we're making your favorite. You could do a second dinner. I would get the mom guilt. Or my parents, they slipped right back into when I was living at home. And so Megan and I, we were out. We went to a concert in Noblesville, and we got back about 12:31 one time, and I opened up the door, and my parents are both sitting in their chairs just looking at me. Oh, where have you been? I'm like, what is this? I'm not used to this at all. And the worst thing that ever happened was they have this little dog, I don't even know what it's called, but I don't like little dogs. Sorry, I'm a big dog person. But this little dog, and I'm laying down on the bed in this bedroom in our basement, and I got my laptop out, I'm returning some email, I've got TV on, and all of a sudden I hear my mom scream, watch out! And I hear the little, down the stairs, and this dog jumps on the bed, pees all over the bed, pees on my laptop and the remote control, and just runs back upstairs like nothing ever happened. And I just remember thinking, it is still alive, it is still alive. But I was thinking, I have got to get out of this house. I don't care if it's dirt floors that I'm gonna be living on. I don't care if it's dirt floors at all. I've got to get out of this house. And my parents were great. It was just a season that I was in the waiting, and I could not wait to get out of that. And that's a light example of sometimes how you've got this giant or this season or this wall that you can't break through. But I know that each and every one of us, it gets more serious than that to us, right? I mean, maybe for you, you feel like a giant in your life is just the hand that you were dealt from your parents. Maybe it was your last name. Maybe it was your brother's reputation who was older than you. Maybe it was your socioeconomic status, your intelligence, your trajectory of your life, and you feel like you were just given a bad hand and you can't do anything about it to break through. I mean, maybe for you, it's an addiction. It's something that you struggle with, and maybe you get 3 steps forward and then take 4 steps back over and over again, and you just get back on that cycle of this addiction. Or if it's not you an addiction, I know that we're all at least just 1 degree separated away from somebody who's struggling with an addiction, and so we know the way that takes place. And maybe for you, it's a relationship where you're in turmoil in a relationship where you feel like you guys are just butting heads all the time and things are not getting better, and you feel maybe that you've done nothing wrong in the situation, but you cannot scale this wall or take down this giant in your life. Maybe for you, you've done something in your past that you feel guilty about. You wish you could go back in time and take care of, but the label guilt is just all over your life. Or maybe for you, it was something that was done to you a long time ago, and you feel shameful about who you are because of what happened to you. And that label is just plastered on your life, and you feel like you cannot erase it no matter how hard you try. In other ways, sometimes it's physical challenges. Maybe it's health challenges, where you've got another doctor's appointment, and you've got another test, and it's circled on the calendar, and it's odd because in some way it feels like it's so close but yet so far away at the same time, and it's all that you can think about. It's right here. And it feels so out of control for you. And you just feel powerless, like you're waiting on something to happen that you have no idea how it got there or how it happened. And there's a story in the Hebrew scriptures, the first 2/3 of our Bible called the Old Testament, where somebody deals with a real giant. It's a story of David and Goliath, and whether you grew up in church and you remember the flannel graph thing going on with David and Goliath, or maybe you didn't grow up in church, but you just heard culturally little things about David and Goliath. It's a sports metaphor that happens all the time with a 16 seed or a 1 seed in the college tournament, or whatever it might be. But the story is sort of burnt onto our cultural memory in a way, but it's usually burnt on our memory with a kid's lens to it. And the kid's version of David and Goliath goes a little something like this. Goliath was a big bully who was talking trash to God's people. David stood up for God and for God's people. He was this little shepherd boy. He comes in and he's like, you're not going to be talking crap about our God anymore or our nation. And he takes him down with one smooth rock, hits him between the eyes. And it's the best underdog story ever. I mean, David's like the Rudy of the Bible. And that's what we get from this, right? That's sort of the way that we hear it when we're kids. And what's interesting to me about the way we hear it when we're kids is, we hear this story and it sounds kind of fantastical, right? It sounds hard for us to wrap our minds around. It sounds otherworldly. It sounds Lord of the Rings style or Game of Thrones or something like that it's hard for us to understand today. And we hear this story of David and Goliath when we're a little kid. At the same time, we're hearing a lot of fantastical stories, and sometimes we're believing those stories with our kid lenses on. And we learn about David and Goliath at the same time. We believe other things that we grow out of, like the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy, and hopefully I didn't break any hearts this morning, but we learn about those things. At the same time, we hear about some of these fantastical stories in the Bible, and as we grow up, as we get a little bit more cynical, a little bit more calloused, and we see more of life, sometimes most of the time we forget about believing in the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy, but sometimes we throw away some of the power of this David and Goliath story or some of those stories in the Bible that are hard for us to wrap our minds around as well. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to take us back to the story of David and Goliath, and I'm hoping that we all together can put on our adult lenses and maybe fresh eyes to see this story in a new way. Because I believe that what this story is going to tell us is so powerful. And if you're facing giants in your life, if you're facing a wall that you don't know how to scale, I think what we'll learn is that when we seem to be at a disadvantage, God sees things slightly different. So to do this, I want to start by giving us a little bit of context about ancient warfare. And I know there's like 3 men in the room this morning that are excited that we're going to talk about ancient warfare, but everybody else, stick with me. It gives us a lens. This gives us a context and a picture for how we should understand this really bizarre story found in the Old Testament. The first thing we need to understand is that this battle between David's people, God's people, and Goliath, called the Philistines, this battle between these two forces were over a piece of land. Like many wars in the modern times and many wars still today, people are fighting over geography. And the geography that they're fighting over is this place called the Valley of Elah. Can you guys say Elah with me? 1, 2, 3. There's your Hebrew for the morning. Yeah, the Valley of Elah. And this was a very important piece of land because it was sort of the gateway to many different countries, many different kingdoms. And Israel was on one side sort of owning the Valley of Elah, and the Philistines wanted to take out Israel so that they could have the Valley of Elah. And another interesting thing about ancient warfare is instead of having, say thousands of people on one side and thousands of people on the other side sort of collide in the middle like a Lord of the Rings kind of battle, there was this thing called single combat. And it's actually pretty wise use of human resources when you think about it, because one side would have a champion. And this champion would come down and say, anybody that can beat me, your whole side wins. And both sides would do this, and they would meet in the middle. And so instead of a loss of thousands and thousands of lives, there was a loss of one life, and you win for your whole team, and you get to have all the marbles at the end of the battle. And this is what happens. And so the Philistines send down their champion, and his name is Goliath. And this is where I want to pick up in the scriptures. We're going to be hanging out in 1 Samuel 17. And verses 4 through 7, we get a description of Goliath. And I love this description here. It says, verse 4, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. He was over 9 feet tall. And I love in the original Hebrew, it says he was 6 cubits in a span, which I think is very accurate. We should start measuring like that again, right? He's over 9 feet tall, a really big guy. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. And 5,000 shekels weighed about 125 pounds. So that's a lot of armor that he has on him. And on his legs, he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod. And a weaver's rod was actually 8 feet long. And so that's a pretty big spear he had there. And its iron point weighed 600 shekels, which was 15 pounds, just at the very end of this 8-foot spear that he had. And we're told that his shield bearer went ahead of him. Now, what should we know about Goliath? He was a bad dude, right? He was a guy who was well equipped to intimidate and well equipped to take down anybody in front of him in hand-to-hand combat. But not only that, he was an incredible trash talker. He would give Kevin Garnett or Charles Barkley a run for their money, because this is what Goliath would come down and taunt God's people with every day. In verse 8, the very next verse, we're told Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul?" Saul was the king of God's people, Israel. "Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." And on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. I mean, this was scary stuff, and I think we need to remember that Goliath came out every single day and would taunt God's people with this. This is who Goliath was. And nobody from Israel's side was ever stepping up to fight Goliath. And this is where we meet our unlikely hero, a shepherd boy by the name of David. And now, David wasn't supposed to be at this battle at all. His father, Jesse, had sent him to the battle to check on his 3 older brothers who were fighting in the war. He brought some supplies with him, and he's like, give me a report of how your brothers are doing. Are they still alive? Are they injured? How are they doing? And so David's not even supposed to be there, but David walks into the camp, and he hears Goliath doing his daily taunt. And David is irate that they're allowing this to happen. I mean, he's like looking around like, no one's going to fight this guy? You're going to let him defy our God and our way of life and our people? You guys are going to let him do that? And he's causing a big scene in the camp. And so some of the soldiers bring him all the way before King Saul, because they think if anybody can shut this shepherd boy up, it would be King Saul. And so he gets before the king, and he's telling the king, I want to take this guy down. I want to fight this guy. And David starts to give King Saul his pedigree, his resume for why he is a great choice to take down Goliath. And this is what David's speech says, starting in verse 34. But David said to Saul, your servant, talking about himself, has been keeping his father's sheep. Now, that doesn't seem like a laugh line for us, but in the king's courts, you better believe everybody would have started cracking up laughing at him. Because we think today of shepherds in the time of the Bible as like a noble profession. But during this time, shepherds were at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. They were known for being smelly and weird and uneducated. And David starts his speech about how he's qualified to take down Goliath with saying, I used to take care of my father's sheep. Something weird is going on here, right? And he continues with his resume, and he says, when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by the hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. And then there's a great insult that I think we should reinstitute in today's language. And this uncircumcised Philistine, try that the next time you're in a fight, right? Will be like one of them because he has defiled the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And so Saul, in a way of saying, we got to find a way to shut this kid up, basically says, good luck, kid, good riddance. He says, go and let the Lord be with you. And he sends David out to fight Goliath. Now, Saul also, I don't want to spend time there, but Saul also offers to give David his shield, his sword, and his armor. And David looks at it, he's like, no, that's not my style, that's not my thing. I'm just going to go out dressed like a shepherd because that's what I am. And he gets 5 smooth stones and a slingshot, and the rest is history. One shot right between the eyes to take down this giant. Now I want to step out of the story just for a second and back to our life and our circumstances. You see how it looks like David is so ill-equipped that none of the odds are on his side at all. They're all on Goliath's side. And it looks like David is such an underdog. Don't we feel like that so often? Like we are at such a disadvantage. Like we are upside down and there is no chance of victory of ever moving forward. That's how I feel often. And David somehow has something inside of him, some understanding, some confidence, some identity about him that he moves forward and he steps right onto the battlefield, and the rest is history. Now, what I want to do for the next couple of minutes is I want us to lean in to this story, and I want us to see that if you feel like David and you've got a disadvantage, maybe you're right where God wants you to be. Maybe God looks at something that we call a disadvantage and he sees it upside down and he says, no, you're right where I want you to be. You're at an advantage that you can't quite understand yet. And as we look at this text and some of the details that we gloss over so often, David wasn't the underdog that we so often assume he was. In many different ways. The first way that David was actually at an advantage is just the type of warrior that David was. I mean, he was called a slinger or an archer, which I'm not making those words up. In ancient warfare, that was like a whole group of people in the army. And they were incredible. They were truly incredible because they were like snipers of today, and they could attack from long distance. And we assume so often that David wasn't equipped because he didn't have a sword, he didn't have a shield, and he was so much smaller than Goliath. But that's not the case at all, actually. Robert Durenwind, who's an ancient historian, said this about how David wasn't really at a disadvantage at all, but he was actually at an advantage. This is what this historian says. Goliath had as much a chance against David as any warrior with a sword would have against an opponent armed with a .45 caliber pistol. And we think that David wasn't prepared and he was an underdog, but because he was prepared to do long distance attack, he was actually at a better advantage, and Goliath was the one at a disadvantage. I think that's so fascinating. Not only that, but people in the king's courts laughed at the experience and the resume and the pedigree that David presented to the king and his people. They laughed at his experience of taking care of the sheep and protecting his sheep against bears and lions and tigers, oh my, and all that reality, right? They laughed at him. But that experience was exactly what David needed to actually have the upper hand in this battle. We're told in the stories of history that many medieval battles ended because of archers or because of slingers that had an incredible distance and they had an incredible accuracy to their attack. I used to think when I was a little kid that David sort of like went like this, like, oh, I hope this works, and let go of it, and God sort of like directed the stone exactly where it needed to go right between Goliath's eyes. But no, it wasn't luck. It wasn't God sort of redirecting the stone, or at least I don't think so. I think this was from years and years of experience and character and skill that was honed in by David when he was out in the wilderness. His experience being a shepherd was perfect for what he needed to do to take down Goliath. And because he was a skilled slinger, I mean, we're told in history that these guys could hit a target from 200 yards away, 2 football fields away. They could hit a target, or they could hit a bird mid-flight just by slinging around a rock and hitting it with incredible accuracy. David's experience taking care of the sheep in the wilderness was exactly what he needed so that he could be prepared to take down Goliath. Not only that, but, people laughed and they were so confused why he didn't wear the king's armor. I mean, what an honor it would be to wear King Saul's armor in battle. But he said, no, that's not my style. I don't want to do that. He didn't wear the armor, which made it look like he was at disadvantage because he could just be slaughtered with one hit. But it wasn't the case. I mean, we're told in chapter 17, verse 48, that this was another advantage that David had. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. David ran quickly. He knew that he couldn't be spry, he couldn't be quick on his feet if he was wearing the king's armor at all. There's no way, because he'd be so slow because he's wearing a grown man's armor. And so he's like, I'm not going to wear that. You guys might think it's a disadvantage for me, but I've got other plans. And he was quick because of that. There's another advantage that David had. But not only did David have all these advantages that we see as disadvantages, but we learned something about Goliath and giants as well. And there's this myth that Goliath was really invincible, and there's nobody that could take down Goliath, but that's not true at all. We see this in lots of different ways. Goliath was only suited for one kind of combat, one kind of fighting, and that's up close. He only had a spear that was 8 foot long, and his enemy had to be close to him so he could take him down. He wasn't suited for any other kind of combat at all. He's not quick. He's not agile at all. We're told multiple times in the text that he kept taunting people to come to me. And it wasn't like, come on and get some. It wasn't that at all. It was very much like, I can't move very fast, and I had a big breakfast. Why don't you come to me? It's what he says over and over again because he wasn't fast. It was another area of Goliath's life that was not an advantage at all. And what I think is most interesting possibly about Goliath is that he might have been blind. He could have been blind and not see very well or have double vision. A lot of modern historians believe that Goliath could have had what's called acromegaly. And acromegaly is a medical disorder where your body just keeps producing human growth hormone throughout your whole life at the same pace, and it doesn't ever stop. Throughout history, people think Andre the Giant had acromegaly. Some people believe that our president Abraham Lincoln had acromegaly. And a lot of people, looking at the clues that we get in the text, think that Goliath had acromegaly as well. I mean, for one thing, he's led down into the valley to the battle line by his shield bearer. which is really odd for a big, tough warrior to be led down by his shield bearer. He probably couldn't see right in front of his face at all to walk down the valley. But we get another clue in the text, which I think is really interesting. In verse 43, he taunts David, but there's a clue that Goliath couldn't see really well in this. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Now, at first we think this is just like a taunt that Goliath had, but why would he say, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" I mean, David might have had one staff because he was a shepherd, but he didn't have two. So quite possibly he was seeing double vision. He couldn't see what was going on at all with his enemy. And that's why he had to get him close, because he could not see far away at all. I think this shows us that so often we think that our giants, they're invincible. But giants cry too. Giants aren't invincible. Giants have issues as well. And it looked like Goliath was at the advantage, but he was actually at a disadvantage that it's hard for us to see. So, as I've been studying and reading about this text and this story, I've come to believe there's a bigger reality to the David and Goliath story than just underdog takes down the big dog. And, for a while now in my life, I've had a hard time getting it from my head down to my heart, which is sometimes the longest, hardest journey. But I've been trying to understand a bigger, deeper picture to this story of David and Goliath, and I think it's really landed in this sentence, in the way that we see our problems and our giants, that God uses our setbacks as setups. God uses our challenges, our fights with giants, our disadvantages. He uses those, he sees those and views those as something that we don't, something so much bigger. We see our setbacks like the end of our story so often, and God is the incredible author of plot twists and surprise endings and giving us a story that's more beautiful than anything we could come up with in our own minds. But in David's story, we so often see this setback or this big wall, this giant in front of him, as this impossible enemy to defeat. But God didn't see it that way. God gave David advantages that he couldn't quite understand at the time. And this is what God does in my story and in all of our stories as well. He sees the picture for bigger than it actually is. He sees the long play when we can only have our nose up against the screen. And it just reminds me, the different ways that God does this is incredible, because sometimes God uses our battles with our giants to do something inside of us that only a battle with a giant could accomplish. I think about that verse that I shared at the very beginning of my talk, James 1:2. And James 1:2 says this. This is Jesus' brother speaking. He says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." And that sounds crazy, but he's not done with his thought, because he completes this sentence and this thought in verse 3, and he says, "Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." You can consider it joy. You can smirk about it a little bit when you have challenges in your life, because God is doing something inside of you. He's producing something. He's building muscle that you don't have before, called perseverance. Some people call it grit, where you can look at a wall and you're going to break down that wall. It might take you a long time, but you're going to figure out a way to take down the wall, or you're going to figure out a way to scale the wall or take down the giant and defeat the giant in your life. This is sometimes what God does in our setbacks. He produces something inside of us. I think it's interesting in just our anatomy and our biology. I read once that when we have a wound and there's scar tissue that's developed, that sometimes the scar tissue on our bodies comes back stronger than the original skin. It's almost like God has weaved in this perseverance and this grit inside of our bodies and the way that we are designed, to believe that maybe through some pain, through some struggle, he can make us stronger than we even were in the first place. I read once in World War II, before America got into World War II, the Nazis were bombing for 56 days straight the city of London in England. I think it's hard for us to imagine 56 days of bombing in a city. But this is what was going on. And so they would go to work every day. They would do their thing every day. And they were just encouraged to just keep moving forward. This is where we get that internet meme or that you see on t-shirts all the time, keep calm and carry on. This was the message that Churchill gave the people in London. And they would not know what time of the day this blitzkrieg or this bombing was taking place, but they would just take shelter whenever they heard the sirens. And many people lost their lives, but a lot more people survived. And what's fascinating is that the generation of survivors from this blitzkrieg, they were an incredible generation in London. I mean, they built incredible things. They moved culture forward. They were so tough. They were described as a generation of people who had a stiff upper lip, basically saying, I can take anything on the chin because I survived blitzkrieg. They had a grit about them, a perseverance about them because they had survived these terrible attacks for almost 2 months, every single day. God uses our trials. He uses these battles with our giants to do something inside of us. And I wonder if we could just open our eyes, maybe lift our eyes a little bit to see beyond our circumstance right in front of them. Maybe we could start to understand we're not at the total disadvantage here, but God is working something beautiful. And he's going to make me stronger on the other end if I just lean in to trusting him no matter what. Another way that God sees our setbacks as setups is in the way that we can be used by God to help other people. C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite Christian thinkers of the 20th century, he said this. I'm going to try to get the quote right because it's not on the screens, but he said, friendship begins at the moment when one person turns to the other person and says, what, you too? I thought I was the only one. So often, maybe God allows giants to take place in our life or challenges to take place in our life so that we can be the gateway to healing and hope for somebody else. Maybe you've experienced something that somebody else has gone through, but you can help them and show them how they can find hope and healing on the other side. I think this happens all the time. Some of the most beautiful stories take place from people that understand that God never wastes a hurt. He'll never throw away pain, but he'll always find a way, if we'll allow him, to use it to make something beautiful happen on the other side. One of my favorite TV shows growing up was a show on NBC called The West Wing. And there's this incredible scene in season 2 where Josh, who's the younger character, he's dealing with post-traumatic stress because he was shot in a mass shooting. And he's harming himself. He's lashing out at his coworkers. He's seeing a counselor. He's not really taking it seriously. And after his counseling session, he runs into his supervisor, his boss, a guy by the name of Leo. And I love the beauty of this interaction and what Leo, the boss, says to young Josh, who had this challenge and who's dealing with this stress. Let's check out this clip.
How'd it go?
Did you wait around for me?
How'd it go?
He thinks I may have an eating disorder.
Josh.
And fear of rectangles. That's not weird, is it? I didn't cut my hand on a glass. I broke a window in my apartment.
This guy's walking down the street when he falls in the hole. The walls are so steep he can't get out. A doctor passes by and the guy shouts up, "Hey, you, can you help me out?" The doctor writes a prescription, throws it down in the hole, and moves on. Then a priest comes along and the guy shouts up, "Father, I'm down in this hole, can you help me out?" The priest writes out a prayer, throws it down in the hole, and moves on. Then a friend walks by. "Hey, Joe, it's me, can you help me out?" And the friend jumps in the hole. Our guy says, "Are you stupid? Now we're both down here." The friend says, "Yeah, but I've been down here before and I know the way out." Long as I got a job, you got a job, you understand?
You see, I've been down here before and I know the way out. My friends, you know what your neighbors and your friends need? They don't need you to just tell them, "Hey, I'm praying for you," or they don't need you to write them an email or a text of the step-by-step of what they need to do. You know what so often they need? They need someone to say, hey, I've been here before. I know the hurt, I know the pain, but you know what? I know a God who walked me out. And I want to get in the hole with you so that we can find a way out together. So often, if we open up our eyes and sometimes open up our imaginations to imagine what God can do, God will use our pain, he will use our hurt, our disappointment, our challenges, our giants. He'll use those things so that we can help other people and so that we can show them hope and healing and light and life no matter where they are. And that takes a measure of maturity. Because so often, if you're anything like me, if I've got a challenge, it's like all that I can see is what's going on in my life. But some of the challenge and this beauty of what the scripture is teaching us is to look beyond just ourselves and our challenge, to look around to see a possibility of what God could do. And that maybe God's allowing this to happen for the benefit of somebody else so that we can be a blessing to them. I think there is no better picture of a dark, broken situation that God brought light out of than at the cross. You know, at the cross where Jesus died, you had a perfect, sinless, incredible leader and teacher who was unjustly put to death. Where the creator and the sustainer of the world breathed his last breath and died a real death unjustly. And it wasn't just because of a mistake, or it wasn't just a sad story, but he did it for you. He did it for me. And he took maybe the darkest moment of all history, and then 3 days later, what we sang about already this morning, he turned it around to a resurrection and opened up light and life and healing to give to the entire world if we would accept it. It's almost like God has a bad habit of taking broken things and making them beautiful again, taking dead things and bringing them to life. It's what he does. And so no matter what your situation is this morning, no matter what your giant is, whatever wall is in front of you, man, I want to encourage you to open up your eyes and maybe look beyond or around your challenge. To see a God on the other side who says, I'm here, I'm stronger, I'm with you, and you can trust me. And you might see a disadvantage in every way, shape, and form, but if you hold on, if you trust him, you'll see that you're not at the disadvantage you so thought you were, but that God sees this setback as a setup for this glorious future he has for you. So would you guys stand up with me? We're going to close the service this morning. Our team's going to lead us in a song of hope in the face of a storm, a song of light in the face of darkness. No matter what your situation is this morning, I'm praying that you would lean in to the truth of this, believing that God turns your setbacks into setups for the future he has for you, and that you're not alone, that God can use you in your pain. So let's respond together.